Hey guys, it's Matt here, and in this video, I've got myself an iPad Air 2 again, and we're going to see how it holds up in 2023. The iPad Air 2 has 2 gigabytes of RAM with the A8X processor and 16 gigabytes to 128 gigs of storage. Now, someone in my comment section of my post pointed out that this is a 16 gig iPad. And yes, you are correct, they pulled that from the model number, so good job, I guess, for getting some sneak peek info about this thing before the video even came out. Other than that, though, iPadOS 15 is the last version of iPadOS that runs on these. These devices got quite a few iPadOS versions, though the iPad Pros technically get the same amount now. Of course, you had to dim off. Because these iPads, the iPad Airs, got from iPadOS 8 to 15. The iPad Pro first generations get from iOS 9 to iPadOS 16. So it's the same amount of versions, so this thing's not really special anymore, unfortunately. I would say that 15 is probably the better version to be killed off on an iPad like this. Now let's go over iPadOS 15. This is iPadOS 15, obviously. It's running the latest version of iPadOS, but let's go ahead and see what iPadOS 16 looks like. Probably don't notice much of a difference, do you? They changed a few things here and there, but the home screen, from what I can tell anyways, is identical. There have been no changes with the iPadOS home screen since iPadOS 15, besides some shadows here and there. There's really been nothing changed about it. In fact, you can see I have the same widgets. The only difference between these iPadOS versions are the fact that this iPad, since it can run 16, gets a weather app, and this iPad has a measure app, which is not even an iPadOS 16 feature. That's just because the Air 2 lacks the hardware to be able to use that app. iPadOS 16 was a nothing release. I'm saying it right now. It was a nothing release. Genuinely brought nothing new to the table for iPad owners like me, unless you have an iPad Pro or the newest iPad Air and you can use Stage Manager. That I would say is a pretty big feature if you even like using something like that. But other than that, nothing's changed. Everything else is pretty much exactly the same. iPadOS 15 really brought everything new to the table. iPadOS 15, for instance, brought the modern home screen that we still have in iPadOS today. It brought low power mode to iPad. It changed the way multitasking works. It gave us the app library on iPadOS. It added widgets to the home screen, along with changing the layout of the home screen depending on if you have widgets on it or not. It added Quick Note, however this iPad doesn't get it for some reason. I'll elaborate on that more later. It added focus modes to iOS and iPadOS, and it changed the way notifications looked, along with several other features that I'm not going to go into because it would make this video extremely long, but you get the gist of it. Almost every feature I mentioned, this iPad can actually take advantage of. However, like I said, a few of them you can't for some reason. Quick Note, for instance, being a really dumb omission to these iPads. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Quick Note is a feature where you can swipe up from the corner and it will bring open a little notepad window for you to take notes on. This iPad, I could not figure out how to enable it. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it was added to iPadOS 16 and this iPad just didn't get it. But after doing some research, Apple's website says that this feature works on iPadOS 15 and later. So I was like, okay, so let's go to the settings, and I know that you have to use a gesture to pull it up. So let's go to gestures, and oh, that's probably why it didn't work. Right corner swipe is off, and the option for it's just not there. So I was like, okay, let's go to the control center then. I know you can enable Quick Note through the control center, and it's not a toggle in here. So after looking through here and being like, okay, this is really weird, this iPad should have it, I looked closer on Apple's support documentation on the feature, and if you look at the section for iPadOS 16, which is the main page, it doesn't say anything. If you look at the section for iPadOS 15, it adds a little parenthesis saying, not available on iPad Mini 4 and iPad Air 2. Now that honestly to me is bonkers, and the reason why I say that is because note-taking is not a hard feature at all. And just to prove that this iPad can do it, let's do a split view because this iPad completely supports that feature. So let's open up the App Store, for instance, and then let's go ahead and put Notes as a split view. So you can see I just drag it over to the side and I can use both apps simultaneously. It'll let me do things in both apps. I don't know what kind of word that just made. Yeah, this iPad just straight up won't let you use Quick Note. However, I could open up Notes and scroll through here, and I could jot down stuff over here, and it can handle that fine. So not having a feature like Quick Note available on this iPad, in my opinion, is really dumb, especially because this isn't even the full capabilities of multitasking on this iPad. You can pop in a picture-in-picture window alongside all of this and it'll handle it fine. Sometimes it stutters a little bit, but Quick Note would have been super easy for this iPad to do, and I genuinely don't know why it was not included. So what features does this iPad just not have on iPadOS 16? Well, to be fair, I really can't think of much besides Stage Manager and the Weather app, and the former wouldn't even run on this thing anyways because this iPad's too old. You need an iPad with an M1 chip or an A12X or later, which would be in the iPad Pros. So yeah, the fact that this iPad won't run it wouldn't be a shock. Even if this thing got iPadOS 16, it wouldn't make a difference. So with that being said, this iPad can run almost anything. There are only a few exceptions to this, and that would be more professional applications like DaVinci Resolve for iPad, which actually does run on my main iPad here, but won't run on this iPad, not because it's too out of date with hardware. I mean, it is. There are newer iPads that can run iPadOS 16 that won't work on here, but DaVinci Resolve requires iPadOS 16, which obviously this iPad can't run, so it won't even try to install the app, which is fine. You wouldn't want to run it on an unsupported device anyways. But yeah, other than that, this iPad could run almost everything. I've seen most apps require at least iPadOS 14, some require 13, some even still require 12 and 11, and this thing can run 15. So with this iPad being able to run such modern software, it is fine. It's totally usable. There's nothing stopping this thing from being completely used day to day. Something that this iPad also supports as well is a keyboard and mouse. The keyboard is nothing new. iPadOS, I think, has supported that since the beginning, and so has iOS. But mouse support was added to iPadOS 13. It was either 4 or some other, I don't remember what it is, but either way, this iPad got it. Now, you need to hook up a Bluetooth mouse or hook one up to the Lightning port. Because this device has no kind of keyboard folio or anything, you'd need to just hook up a mouse like that. But iPadOS 15 fully supports that feature. You'll get the same circle cursor that you get on any iPad, really. And honestly, I kind of wanted to try it and use this thing as a computer for a week or so. Besides using it as a video editor, that wouldn't really work. I could use this as a day-to-day iPad, or even as my main computer. So let me know in the comments if you want to see that. So yeah, with this iPad having all of the features that a modern iPad would, this thing is just going to be fine for almost anybody. I could give this to my mom, I could give this to my grandparents, I could give this to anyone here who would just need a basic iPad to watch YouTube videos, to browse Facebook, to browse Twitter, that dumpster fire platform. Anything will run on this because it just can do it. There's Apple Music support, Spotify still works on here, TikTok works just fine, the Apple Store still runs on iPadOS 15 for now. I know that app kind of kills off early. Pages, Keynote, Numbers, everything runs on here, even with an out-of-date version of iPadOS, which I honestly think is superior to iPadOS 16, but maybe that's just me. And yeah, it honestly doesn't look like an old iPad. This iPad looks phenomenal for its age. You've got the laminated display, which I actually kind of missed. My main iPad doesn't have it, and the other spare iPad that I was using, which is my iPad Air 1, doesn't have it either. The Air 2 was the first iPad to introduce the laminated display. So yeah, the fact that this thing can run at least iPadOS 15 makes me really happy. And this was actually something when iPadOS 15 released, I was gonna be like, yeah, if the Air 2 doesn't get this, it's going to be a huge bummer because it honestly deserved some of these features, and it got them. Now, the reason why I say that, and I'm just gonna go on a little side tangent about iPadOS 14. Now, for anyone who remembers this, iOS 14 added all of the big features to iOS, like widgets on the home screen. That was a big one. It added a ton of new stuff. It added picture-in-picture, which the iPad already had, so that wouldn't have really made a difference. But it optimized it, and it did all that kind of stuff, but the iPad didn't get any of those features. It didn't get the app library, it didn't get widgets on the home screen. You just had a little sidebar where you could scroll through your widgets. Now, if you actually do want to see how that looks, you can watch my 2021 video of the iPad Air 2 when iPadOS 14 was actually the latest version, and you can see what that looked like. But yeah, it did not look good on this iPad for obvious reasons. At least to me, I just did not like the way that iPadOS 14 handled. And when iPadOS 15 launched and announced, oh, there's gonna be all these big home screen changes, you can put widgets on your home screen, you can do this, you can do that. There was tons of features added. I was like, the Air 2 is not getting this update. And lo and behold, it did. It was the last version that actually runs on here, and I'm very glad, to say the least, that it was, because having this kind of home screen on a tablet that's almost 10 years old is pretty phenomenal, to say the least. I'm very happy to have such modern features on such an old device, and not only that, it handles them really well. So yeah, this video is already getting a little long, so I'm just gonna sum it up here. If you have an iPad 2 or even a Mini 4, which my grandparents do you need to upgrade? I'm gonna say no, you do not have to, because these iPads not only are still completely usable on their current software that they can run, they also still get security updates. In fact, this was the case with iOS 12. I think the latest security update for iOS 12 released sometime earlier this year, meaning that there might even be more coming for those devices, even though I'd be willing to bet the market share for those are dropping a little bit. Not only is this device almost fully up to date with iOS and can run almost anything that you could throw at it, it also gets security updates, meaning that this device is still totally safe to use in a modern setting, which back when devices were killed off, let's just say with the iPhone 5 or the iPad 4, when iOS 10 was their latest versions, that was it. They didn't get any more security updates, they didn't get anything. That has changed nowadays. We're getting security updates for these iPads, and we're getting security updates for the iPhones that got cut off on iOS 15 and the 7th gen iPod Touch. Rest in peace. So yeah, the fact that we're getting these kinds of updates nowadays is phenomenal, and it honestly makes me think that if you're still using a device like this, keep on using it. If you don't need anything new and you don't care about what iPadOS 16 and potentially 17 when that comes out later in the next couple of months, then honestly, you're fine. You don't need to upgrade unless there are features that entice you with iPadOS 16, which honestly there are not a lot. Don't upgrade your iPad if you just want the weather app. Ultimately, this iPad Air 2, I would be willing to say, is probably one of the best iPads that Apple ever made, along with the Mini 4, just because that one's kind of lumped in with this one, though it is a hair bit slower than this iPad is because it has the A8 chip, not the A8X, so it's a little bit slower, but it still runs iPadOS 15 all right. With that being said, that's about it for this video. I can't really think of much more to say about this thing other than I love the Air 2. I'm very happy I got my hands on it again, and if you're still using one, more power to you. These things are awesome tablets, and even for like a little kid, this is way more than what a little kid would need. So yeah, this is an awesome device. I would not say go out and buy one unless you can find one for a really good price, because these aren't getting updates anymore. As I said, they're still getting security updates, but not getting any big features is going to be a problem in the future, and eventually these iPads just aren't going to be worth using for anything. Just as these things get older, they just will get more and more obsolete. Unless you can find one for the price that I did. Like for me, I got this for $50, then that's good, but just go ahead and get a new iPad. I wouldn't suggest buying one of these new.